Well, now I start to write on it again. I mean, I don't write on guitar.
You write the piano.
No, I write. No, I don't. I don't really need a guitar or anything anymore to write. You know, I mean, I write it in my head. I mean, I hear it all in my head. I hear it all in my head now. I don't need this.
Did you used to have that?
Yeah, I used to do this to set up a chord, structure or something like that, and But with Graceland, I would go in with musicians and put down structures, and once the structure's there, I mean, then I just improvise. And now I really don't even need. I don't really need anything. All I need is like a rhythm track, a percussion. All I need is an interesting rhythm, and then in my imagination, I think, well, let's see. This could be a piano, or maybe this should be a group, or horns would be nice here, or maybe I'll try a cello. And I think in terms of textures, matching textures and sounds first. It's taken me all this time to realize that I don't really get into writing a piece of music until it sounds right. A certain sound, which I can't describe other than it's my inner sound. The sounds that I like, when I put those sounds down on a tape, then I'm happy. Now I rearrange the sounds into some kind of harmonic pattern, and once I have the harmonic pattern, I improvise on it. And if I get stuck, I might go to the guitar just to technically work out what scale I'm in and see what maybe some choice of notes that aren't apparent to my just my head. And once I work that out, I go back to the other thing, and then it's just it's music. It's total music. It's like listening. It's listening to sounds. It's listening to music, and it's putting yourself in the middle of it and doing it too. And when it's right, it comes out musical and good. And when it's not, there's something.
Something has to be fine-tuned, or was never good at the
When
start.
it's not, there's something. There's usually. Well, there could be something wrong with the technical thing that I'm doing. Maybe I could reinvestigate the technical stuff, like the harmony or the scales or something like that. Or more likely, the premise is off. Either I'm putting an inappropriate melody to a certain rhythm, or I haven't constructed my textures properly, and they're pulling against each other, and I'm denying it. Part of me is saying, yeah, it's. Every time I've made a record that hasn't been a good record, there's been considerable lying that's gone on.
To yourself.
And usually you get corroboration. I mean, I don't know whether it's lying. Whether they, you get misinformation. You know that something's wrong, but other people, maybe even people whose opinion you have faith in, say it's good. And because you don't know how to solve the problem, you want to believe it's good. So you keep going, and then once you get to a certain point, I mean, if you're a professional, you can solve any problem technically. I mean, I'm never going to make a song where the guy on the street says, "Boy, that's bad." They're just not going to like it. They're just not going to love it.
Billy Joel says he dreams songs.
He does?
He really dreams them. They're almost all structured, and and to the extent that he can remember them, he gets up and writes them. And then McCartney, Paul said that they would almost see a sign on a wall and go write a song about it.
Beatles,
yeah.
Lennon did that,
and Ringo would come in with a title. It's been a hard day's night, 8 days a week, or something like that. Some foolish remark that
Tomorrow Never Knows. That's right. Those are all Ringo titles. That's right. Yeah, he wasn't really credited a lot, Ringo, for his creative input. He was a very creative member of that group. I mean, revisionism
yes, of course.
took him out, but the fact is he was a very influential drummer.
Paul,
and then afterwards, like people said, oh, he wasn't much
just
of
a drummer,
but he was a really good drummer, really good drummer.
And he was. I've talked now to George, to Paul, and to Yoko to the extent I can talk to him, and they said he was an excellent drummer.
He was,
and he had this this kind of out mind there that came up with these titles that they said, listen to that.
Yeah.
That's a great title.
Yeah.
Your titles, your songs, you've heard the word eclectic, I guess, enough to ramp it down your throat already, but where does it all come from you? This variety of songs?
Well, I think a lot of it comes from the fact that I'm from New York. Because are you from New York?
I'm from Boston, but I lived here. No.
I don't think Boston would have been
No, not the same
thing.
thing.
But when I was growing up, at that age where the sounds really remain, because essentially I'm going back to a pool of sounds that I heard at a very young age, and that's the pool that I want.
And what was that pool? Was that the Barry, Greenwich?
Oh no, much before that.
It had to be before
Way
that.
before that, because I was like, at that age, at that point I was 15, 16, and 17. I'm talking about the stuff that you hear when you're, what I heard when I was 12, the very first time I ever heard, rhythm and blues.
Yeah, I see.
A really empty, open mind. So between 12, 13, and 14, I knew the sounds I loved. By the time the Ellie and Jeff period came along, I was already, a beginning professional songwriter, because we recorded that picture.
Sure.
We were 15 years old.
But it's always kind of, here was this group in Brooklyn, Ellie.
Oh, let me
Jeff.
finish the thought,
please,
because you
finish
asked,
this.
then you'll see what I mean. So when I was a kid, there was one station that played rock and roll in New York. It was Alan Freed.
INS.
Right, WINS. And then, he wasn't on every day of the week. I think he was on 6 days a week. So on Sunday, I was looking for it. And the closest I could find to it was gospel. There was a church gospel station. I'd never heard gospel music, but to me it sounded kind of close to what Alan Freed was playing. It was the blues and it was gospel, and a part of rock and roll is derived from gospel music. So that sounded like a station that I'd listen to. It wasn't exactly as good as the rock and roll station, but it was good enough. I know I didn't have any other choice on Sunday. So I would listen to that. On the way to searching for it, I passed this country music station coming out of New Jersey, which I never liked. I never liked it, but I'd pass it and listen to it. The first country tune I remember hearing was "He's in the Jailhouse Now" by Webb Pierce. This is at age 12, which I thought was just hilariously funny and really corny. But as you can see, I still remember, "He's in the Jailhouse Now" by Webb Pierce. By the time Johnny Cash came along into rock and roll, but I'm ahead of myself. So there was a country station that I kind of passed and dismissed. There was a Latin station that I heard. It was around. New York had a lot of musical cultures. Now I was just interested in this one, but it was there. So it was there pretty young. But then early rock and roll really drew from a lot of different elements in the culture, which a situation that you would never find today with the rigid programming formats. So you could have Johnny Cash and the Everly Brothers and Elvis Presley, which today would be on a country station. They wouldn't be on a top 40 station, but they were mixed in. Jimmy Rogers, all of that's Roy Orbison, Gene Vincent, all of that Memphis and Southern country rock was mixed in with doo-wop from the city, and the remnants from the early 50s and late 40s singing groups like the Platters or maybe Ruth Brown, and the people that came out of that R&B tradition that were now calling themselves rock and roll, but really came out of black, the black circuit, when it was called race music.
So all this got absorbed here?
Well, for everybody who was listening to rock and roll, then it became, half part kid stuff, Frankie Lyman, part that older tradition of black music, part white, Southern stuff, Louisiana music, Fats Domino, Jimmy Clanton, a lot of different kinds of music. and really from a lot of different cultures. And it was undifferentiated. It was all just called rock and roll, which I think made for a very rich musical era, and a lot of different sounds from a lot of different cultures. That's the beginning of it. Then the folk movement was also very interested in stuff from other, Music of Bulgaria. You know that album?
Yes.
You know, it's like become like a cult,
Yes.
big cult album now. It was a cult album in 1962 when I first heard it. Albert Grossman brought it to Jack Holtzman at Electric.
He brought it to me. I was because I signed Peter, Paul, and Mary. Then.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, so I remember.
So there was that, and other cultures in folk music. Pete Seeger would sing songs in Spanish, and Woody Guthrie was pure country, and Joan Baez sang songs in other languages. There was an interest in other cultures in the folky movement. So that was another overlay on top of my first exposure. Then my father was a band leader and a musician, and he had a band at Roseland for 25 years. And the other band that played with him, he played on Saturday nights and Thursday afternoons. And the other band on Thursday afternoons was Raymond Argueso. So, sometimes when I was a kid, they'd take me up to see my father play, and he was Raymond Argueso with a salsa band. When I went to England, I was totally exposed to the English folky world, of the Ian Campbell folk group. That was the biggest group, and they did Scottish ballads and traditional stuff and working class, socialist, communist type of tunes. And his kids are in UB40. Ian Campbell's kids are the white kids of UB40 who are playing reggae and
music, sure.
So I always was interested in. I was exposed to a lot of different sounds. When I was in Paris in 1965, right before Simon and Garfunkel broke, I was roaming around Europe by myself, just doing folk stuff. And I met Los Incas on a concert. I was unbooked, and they were booked, and so I was the first time I heard South American music. They gave me an album, of their stuff, and El Condor Paso was on the album. The exact song. The Simon and Garfunkel record was recorded on top of that pre-existing track. So I think that's where it comes from. And just to me, the notion was, if I liked the music, if it sounded good to me, it was popular music. I really didn't make a distinction between one culture and another. Gospel quartets. When I first heard gospel quartets, I related it to the doo-wop groups, but I could see immediately that they were the best. They were the finest of that. Sam Cooke bridges that. So you start to get those sounds. When I was a kid, 12, 13, 14, 15, well, maybe it was over by 15. Yeah, it was over by 15. But in the first few years, I used to sing in groups. So did Artie. We used to be part of 4-man groups, 5-man groups. In fact, it wasn't even man groups. It was 2 girls, 3 guys, sometimes 4 guys. Then when we heard the Everly Brothers, well, actually, before that, we heard Robert and Johnny, and we used to sing like Robert and Johnny.
Together.
Right, Your Mind We Belong To. Then the Everly Brothers, and we became 2 voices. But I knew about all the parts in the group, the bass and the falsetto, and because I sang it and I did it.
How about the story ideas? Where the mother and child reunion was in a Chinese restaurant, I read someplace. The unusual nature of your stories and your lyrics set you aside, it seems to me, from the rest of this Brill Building crowd that did a lot of baby and rather simplistic lyrics, great songs, but yours always seem to have a curveball on them somewhere.
Yeah, my lyric writing isn't based on Brill Building. none of my musical stuff is based on Brill Building. It's all based on rock and roll, which was, I mean, the places that I used to go to here were like B. Caslin, she was in 16, something down there, some little rundown, little tenement she had. What was her record company? Saul Rabinowitz had a record company.
Oh yeah, Harold
called,
Ember. Ember?
No, not Ember.
Herald Records.
Could it be Herald?
Herald Records. You had Harold and Ember.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
He had two
Herald
labels,
Records.
yeah.
He had that.
The one that
That big hit with the
Girl
girls
Covered
group.
on the Coast, the Revelaires, 1,000 Stars in the Sky.
No, earlier than
Oh,
earlier than that. Come back home, you
God, I'll go
great big lump.
got my playlists.
Come get sugar. That was a real great record. It's one of the records that like the sound
Right.
has the sound. It's one of the records that has the sound. I'll think of it in a minute. Anyway, those little tiny labels.
Yeah, I know.
This building was really fancy. You didn't come
Yes.
into this building because this was really big stuff. And 1650 was also.
They were over
people
on
were
9th
rich.
Avenue. They were on
Apollo
11th.
Records.
Sure, yeah.
You know, yeah, those little labels. That Morty Kraft. Well, he was in
Yeah, he was
1650.
in 60. But the other guys, I was the Alan
He
Freed.
signed us.
Yeah.
He signed us. He's the first person to sign us. Morty Kraft signed Artie and me when we were 14. He never cut a record with us, and by the next year we cut our first record, "Hey School Girl."
Whenever I MC any industry function, just by mentioning his name, it's an automatic laugh.
It's a big laugh,
I
I
said,
know.
Woody Kraft's in the lobby working.
That's right.
Woody Kraft.
That's right, Morty Kraft. All of those guys. Well, that was some generation of guys, you know. Morty Kraft, High Weiss, all of those kind of
High Weiss, who I said-
Jewish kind of thieves.
I introduced him. I said that
The
in
$50,
addition,
I
I said
know.
the $50.
It's a very famous line.
It is.
I
For
know.
High Weiss,
I
it
know
keeps
you're
him
right.
alive. He says that people come up to him and say that
That's
to him
right.
all the time.
It was a famous line. Trying to think
But
of
these ideas for stories.
Lonely Nights by the Hearts.
That's right. Yeah,
That's what it was. That
Long-
record,
Yeah.
not long.
No, not Long and Lonely Nights. No, Lonely Nights. Yes.
Lonely nights, lonely nights, lonely nights, lonely nights, lonely nights, I miss you so. There was something about that. I can still hear it. It really had. There was something about the sound. Maybe it was the echo sound. Maybe it was the girl's voice. Maybe it was "Gone" by. Is it the Chantels?
Chantels, yeah.
That record has the sound. Really has got the sound. You know, there's some Mystery Train by Elvis Presley.
Yes.
That had the sound. There's some sound that when you hear it, it's so evocative.
That 1,000 Stars in the Sky by the Revelaires that he
Yeah, that had a lot.
that I would play that on the air in Boston, and they tell me people would scream. I played at a record hop, 2,000 kids. The place come to a standstill there, and no black people lived in Boston.
Right.
It just got to everybody. I guess it was raw emotional things. It's like you hear Summertime Blues.
No, I think it's
Well, what is it?
I think
Sound?
it's something else.
Yeah?
I think it's it is raw emotional, but it's there's something deep in the collective unconsciousness that responds to these sounds. Why? I'm not sure. You know, I can speculate on that. I heard it again in South Africa. As soon as I heard that music from South Africa, I said, and that's one of the reasons that I was able to work with it, you know, so comfortably. To me, it really sounded like sounds that I knew and was crazy about. Just the sound of it.
You still haven't addressed where you come up with the
Oh,
stories.
the lyric.
The lyrics.
The lyric. Well, that's right. I was trying to say that, like, right. I was making the point that the Brill Building was really a place that even musically I didn't particularly. I was too young to think. Well, aesthetically, I'm not really in this place. All I thought was my favorite groups are on labels that are not in this building. They happened to be in, and as I think back now, much smaller, poorer little buildings around town. And lyrically, I never had anything to do with Tin Pan Alley either. I just wasn't interested in it. In fact, I had my first. Hey, I want to keep addressing the question, but every time I do it, it makes me go back to how I got to where I am. My clear recollection of the first time I ever heard rhythm and blues or rock and roll, very clear, very powerful. I'm a New York kid, so I'm a Yankees fan. Listened to the Yankees when, sitting on my father's lap, so of course I'm now a Yankee fan. And when I was around, really at the peak of my passion for the Yankees, I was 12 years old. And so I used to score the games, listen to on the radio, and have a score. You could write single and 3 balls and 2 strikes, and yes, that kind of thing. That's how big a baseball fan I was. So the Yankee games were also on Winds, and they used to come on in the afternoon. I can remember on a summer afternoon going out on the back porch of my house, Queens, getting my scorecard all set up, preparing my pencils, getting everything, having the radio on, didn't want to miss anything that happened, so I'm on like half an hour, 20 minutes early, set for the Yankee game. And on this station is Martin Block, Make Believe Ballroom, and he's playing the popular music of the day, which I just can't stand. As a kid, I'm just thinking, I just can't stand this, and didn't think I was interested in any music at that point. It was Vaughn Monroe. It was, actually, strangely enough, when I hear it now, I really like it, because it really is nostalgic. It's like just about the edge of my memory, But it was not rock and roll, and I didn't like it. I thought it was corny, grown-up music. And one day, he says, now here's a record that people say, there's been a lot of requests for this record, but I have to say it's so bad that if this record is a hit, I will eat it. And it was G by the Crows. And I'm filling in, Rizzuto, Coleman, da-da-dum, G by the... I say, that's not bad. That's the first thing I've liked on this show. Why he's saying this is bad? I like this record, and that's the first time I heard it. So I don't know why I retrogressed there. Where I was coming from.
Talking about stories, and you were lyrics, and you were Yankee games, and you listened to we're still trying to get to where you come up with these ideas for stories. You said you're a Yankee fan, and
I went backwards.
It's terrific.
So, that's right. Here's my point. My lyrics didn't come out of that tradition, Tin Pan Alley. I didn't like the tradition. I didn't like those lyrics. The first lyrics that I wrote when I was 14, the first song I wrote, "The Girl for Me," it was like, oh, let's see, is that the key? Oh, the girl, I wrote this with Artie. Oh, the girl for me is standing there. That's the one, flowers in her hair. I'll always love her, and I know she'll be true. First, typical rock and roll. That was my first song. I think I was 13 years old. So the first lyrics I wrote, they're just rock and roll. Just everybody wrote the same lyric. Flowers in her hair, I mean, it had nothing to do with life at all. The lyrics didn't mean anything. They were just the sounds that you put to essentially, they were the front sounds that you put to ooh, to the background. I think that's all it was. Teen Love or something. And that's where I stayed with lyrics. But when I started to, work professionally, which I did very early, and I was writing, I imitated what was happening. I imitated whoever the pros were or whatever the songs were of, that period, the late 50s, early 60s. So I mean, if there was a new dance called, Get Up and Do the Monkey, I wrote a song that said, Get Up and Do the Monkey. I mean, I didn't know, I was just learning how to be professional, In college, I was a literature major, English literature major, not a music major. So that was the first time that I was, really exposed to poetry. Not that I was terribly interested either. I wasn't really, but it was the first time that I was exposed to it. The first time that it occurred to me that a lyric could be of interest was it was really Bob Dylan. It's the first time that I said, "Hey, that's interesting." He's writing about an interesting subject, and it's not junk. No, I'm wrong. The first time I ever thought that a lyric was interesting was Chuck Berry. And what I thought was, the words come out just the way everybody speaks. They just come as effortlessly as speaking. They're so perfect. And, of course, the imagery was also really powerful.
Morning and off to school.
Yeah, or as I was motivating over the hill, that image of the car racing and the rain is going, the rain cooled down, the road cooled down. It's great imagery, rainwater under the hood and great, really great stuff. Even the name, So that was the first time. The second time I realized that you didn't have to write hack lyrics was when Bob Dylan started to write, protest songs. And I don't know where. That's a good question here. I don't know where it is that I really consciously said, now look, rock and roll is the fundamental language that an entire generation and all the generations that follow it understand. They all understand that language. But so that has to be the foundation. In other words, every time you go, people like it. They like a 4-1. They like Amen. You don't want to discard it. They like that. And I like it. But on the other hand, I don't want to be stuck at some puerile level as I'm getting older and have other things on my mind. So somewhere, not in the Simon and Garfunkel days, because whatever those lyrics were that I wrote, and there were some nice lyrics in there. I wasn't really thinking, now look, I want to use language and juxtapose it in a certain way against music, and I know why I'm juxtaposing it. It was instinct, and in fact, a lot of lyric writing is instinct and can't be explained. So I mean, I'll give you some explanation, but the truth is, I don't know why. I really don't know why I think of losing love is like a window in your heart. I mean, I have no idea. 1 second before that line came, I have no idea that I was going to say it. Lasers in the jungle. I can't tell you why it comes. It comes. But at a certain point, I guess somewhere in the middle 70s, I started to try and use imagery in a poetic way. And it took me about a decade to really get it, so that I understood what the balance was between Chuck Berry and Wallace Stevens. You know, and that when you had the right balance between them, it was very entertaining to people, especially if it sat over those sounds that, like 1,000 Stars in the Sky, that made people jump up. If you could make people jump up for a reason that is in our deep history of the race, and at the same time occasionally catch their attention with something that's striking, you're really making an entertaining piece. And I think that was what was entertaining about Graceland. The groove hit people, and then by the time they noticed the lyrics, they were doubly entertained because the lyrics were sitting there very calmly in a Chuck Berry story, easy way, and then suddenly there was a line that had an enriched language.
In so doing, you have raised the level of expectation in the music public out there.
I hope so.
Does that bother you? I mean,
No.
That you are measured by a different standard now.
Oh, it doesn't bother me. It's something I wanted to do. To me, the music was in real danger. It still is in real danger. Because my theory is that every time the industry gets powerful and every time corporate thinking dominates what the music is, the music really pales. So the great bursts of music were like the middle 50s, and look at where they come from. It comes from tiny little labels, you know. Columbia, RCA, they didn't want any part of it. They didn't start to sign those groups until
Chess and Imperial and Aladdin.
That's right. So there was no marketing corporate thinking. It was real music that came from the people. Well, the people is a terrible expression. It was what people wanted to do musically. They weren't thinking about what was this going to, sell. The first time it started to get a little bit cynical and they wanted to see how you could sell is when you had Fabian and Frankie Avalon and
Manipulative.
Right, they were the teen idols, and it wasn't about music; it was about image. Then there was the pendulum swung, and there was a reaction against that, and you had the Beatles. And again, it comes out of Liverpool. It didn't come out of any corporate thing. It came from like the most unexpected little place, and then folk rock, which came out of Greenwich Village. Again, it was anti-corporate. It was left wing.
Tell me this: when you hit a song, do you know it? I mean, when you put it down there, is there a flash? How does it feel? Does it feel?
Yeah, I would say usually you know it if you hit it. Yeah, if you hit it. Yeah. I knew the minute I wrote, "Like a bridge over troubled water, I will lay me down." That once I wrote that melody and that phrase, which I wrote together at once, I knew that it was a very, very pretty melody, and it was a very clear image, and the whole verse was all set up to hit that melody line.
I saw Stephen Sondheim on a 60 Minute show a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, I saw Steve.
And he says that it's like a burst of light inside all of a sudden.
That's right.
He knows, I got it.
That's
I
right.
got it now. And
Yeah.
that's the way
Exactly.
a songwriter feels. Yeah.
Typical songwriter.
And so that level of expectation that you have raised yourself is a challenge more than a handicap that you got to
Well, I mean, this is what I was thinking. This is what I was thinking when I was working on Graceland. I was thinking, if I don't make this so interesting, I will never get my generation to pay attention. They're not paying attention anymore to records. They were at a certain point, but they don't look to records to have their lives illuminated or right.
Yeah.
They look to they look to movies, and they're dissatisfied because movies weren't really doing it. Literature was doing very well, but people don't read. But literature was doing very well in this in the last decade. There's been a lot of good writers.
Also, your generation is pretty much where they're going to be. They're not going to make some major changes in their lives.
But lives make major changes,
Yes.
just by the passage of time. Now, here's a group of people who are already attuned to a certain language, which is the basic language of rock and roll. So they're there. They're used to listening to information that way, but they've stopped listening to it because the music got, well, it just didn't have anything more to say, particularly to them. It always has something to say to the youngest kids because everything is new to them. You can come with a cliche to a 9, 10-year-old, and it's not a cliche because it's fresh. So on the teen level, the music is always going to be popular. It's always going to exist because they don't know. But for the rest, it became really boring. And I thought, if I don't do this, no one is going to. It's got to be really interesting, or no one is going to listen to this album because people are not. It wasn't even about me. They just were. People weren't listening to albums. Not the people that I knew. Nobody said, "Oh, I can't wait for so and so's new album." Nobody was saying that for years. It used to be people couldn't wait for the next Beatles album or the next Stones album or whatever it was. They couldn't wait for it, And now, I don't know who you could say that people can't wait for. Bruce Springsteen.
I guess that's
people can't wait for a Bruce. Not my generation, but
no.
just one
generation back.
half a generation
back.
Right.
That's right.
Yeah. And Michael Jackson, because he's an entertainment phenomenon.
Yeah, it's an event.
Although nobody that I knew was interested at all in this album before it came out.
Yeah.
It's interesting. It's a big hit, but before it came out, people had already decided that they weren't interested.
He had been the moment. He had flashed.
Yeah. Of your
group.
So I thought in Graceland, look, this is really it, and if I don't make this really interesting, that's it. I can then say, as a recording artist, well, maybe I'll be someone who sells 500,000 albums, and there'll be a certain group of people that'll always be there, but I won't have any effect on the thinking, and I won't have any effect on the culture, and I won't.
Was there a great level of frustration after the record before that? I mean, that maybe it was your generation fading away and you had lost the way. How did that affect you?
Well, that happens to be tied in with another personal event in my life, which was Carrie and I were having. We were married, and then we were 3 months later. We weren't married, and that personal turmoil is so mixed up with Hearts and Bones not being a hit, plus the Simon and Garfunkel reunion was so unpleasant. That album, I started that album before we went on tour, and then Artie really wanted to be on that album, and there was a lot of record company pressure and all of that, so I said okay, and then it never happened. I don't want this in this.
No, this would be
but he didn't do his job.
Yeah.
He just didn't do his job, and he. So that got in there, the drain of it, to be back in this partnership that was a fight. It wasn't pleasant, and I thought, well, this time it's going to be pleasant, because everybody wants to see us. It's like 500,000 people turned up in Central Park.
Yeah.
What can be bad? Everybody's already said they like us, but there's always a fight about something that was stupid. So all of those things
You can't separate
all happened together.
from your music.
So I can't say exactly whether I was frustrated. I will say this: I didn't have my full concentration on that record because of these other things. Because of I was in the middle of touring and deciding that he really shouldn't be on the album because he wasn't contributing, and getting married into I had so many things that I wasn't concentrating. And I had never really had a record that wasn't a hit. So I wasn't thinking I wasn't going to have a hit. And the people at Warner Brothers weren't saying it wasn't a hit. They were saying, this is a hit, it's great, we love it. So the things that I didn't think were good, so that's what I said at the top of the conversation. I was denying them, I was saying, well, I don't really love it, but, well, look, I had a lot of hits that I didn't really love, which is true. So it'll probably be all right. And then it came out, and well, actually, it was quite well received critically.
Yeah, sure.
But it wasn't a hit. It took me a long time to sort out all of these other elements. But it took me a long time before I finally said, look, stop rationalizing. It wasn't a hit. Yeah, it wasn't a hit. Stop saying like, oh, wow, that people are dumb, or radio is this, or whatever. I said there was no hits on there. Nobody said it was bad, except me, privately to myself, on many of the things. And several of the songs were really good, really good. Renee and Georgette Magritte with their dog after the war, Hearts and Bones, Train in the Distance, the late great Johnny Ace.
I play the album a lot at the beach.
On those songs, the lyrics were like the predecessors to Graceland. Hearts and Bones is the companion piece to the song Hearts and Bones to the song Graceland. It's about the same relationship. Hearts and Bones is about the thing in the middle of it, and Graceland is about afterwards. Losing love is like, it's the same subject. So some of those songs, the Magritte song, which I thought was a really good song, and very nice lyric writing. When everything was settled, I said, nothing wrong with that, except let's be honest, Paul. If you want people to listen, don't write a song about Magritte. Nobody's heard of him for the most part, or those who have heard of him haven't heard of the Penguins and the Moonglows and the Orioles, and those who heard of the Penguins and the Moonglows and the Orioles haven't heard of Magritte. And except for you and Nesui Erdogan, nobody else has got this thing fully pounding in their heart, So it's a very good idea and a very good song, but it's not going to be a hit. So the next time you write, better start to talk to a larger group of people, and at the same time, don't lower your standards. If you enjoy like writing Magritte and Hearts and Bones and that kind of lyric writing, write it, but make sure that it's accessible. So you have Graceland and Boy in the Bubble and You Can Call Me Al. They all have, the lyrics are all fine, but the groove is there. The first thing that happens is the groove hits you. The next thing that happens is you start to hear the lyrics. So I allowed the groove. It's not even allowed. You must give the groove. The groove predominates, because if you have a great rhythm sounding thing, people will like it, and they will forgive a banal lyric. If you have a great lyric and the other stuff doesn't work, it's going to go away. So you have to do them both, but you have to acknowledge that the rhythm, the basic thing that we respond to out of our guts, that has to be there first. And then the next thing, if you really want to get people, the next thing is you have to start to talk about. You have to be interesting. And I was being, even with Graceland, my field of vision was limited. I essentially said, I kept thinking, if I don't make this interesting, my generation they're not going to listen to it, and I'm not talking to anybody other than my generation, really. That's my job, is to talk about what goes on in my life. So I narrowed the field of vision, and some of the criticism that I got from Graceland came from people that weren't in that field of vision, who said, these lyrics are, yeah, I like the music, but the lyrics are kind of irrelevant, or they're superficial. I mean, I used to get, particularly from young blacks or militant blacks, they'd say, well, what are these lyrics? What are you doing here? About cinematographers, parties, and a man walks down, he's soft in the middle, and why is it, it was not their group. I was writing about another group. But the record became so popular that all groups started to pay attention. Some said, yeah, it's great, but who cares about that?
Was this success sweeter than any other success?
Well, it certainly was. It certainly was very welcome, considering where I had been. You know, considering the 2 minor 7 chord was in such bad shape. It was really welcome. I was proud of all of the successes, all of the things that did well. I was very proud of Bridge Over Troubled Water. I was very proud of Still Crazy after all these years. I thought Rhymin Simon was a really good album. And I think Graceland is a really good album. And I think that's my best. Those are my best work. And then other albums have nice pieces in them, but they don't hold up quite as much. Bookends has some nice early Simon and Garfunkel things, and Hearts and Bones has some nice things. But I mean, taking it as a total work, those 4 albums are probably the best of my work from the different period, from the early, the middle, and now this latest period.
Is it hard to be Paul Simon? I mean, is it difficult to...
I never think about something like that. We are who we are.
Very, very well.
Yeah, that's a good signing. He's interesting.
Is it hard for you to get up for a project now, or of course now with the situation, you're stimulated, or?
Oh, I have 2 things I'm working on that I'm very interested in. Very interested.
And to get yourself and your adrenaline flowing, is that after all these years, is it still there?
Oh yeah, it doesn't have anything to do with years at all.
Is it competitive? Or do you feel competitive?
No, I don't really feel. No, I don't. No, you know, it's. Hey, you see what Linda Ronstadt has done? She does what she's interested in. I do what I'm interested in. I always did what I was interested in. It's easier when what you were interested in becomes a hit and people like it. Then you can relax and feel confident. And so the stuff that I'm working on now, I mean, I'm writing a show. I have another idea for an album that I think is, very intriguing. An idea. And now that I know more about how to construct the record, now that I know I'm dealing in sounds and rhythms, and that's fun because I'm looking to hear that sound that I like. If I don't hear it, I say that's not it. I mean, I'm not afraid to say that's not it, or not do anything. I mean, I don't feel I have to do anything unless I like it now. The writing is always hard. I always get anxious when I have to go to write. I've always been like that. Always. And I think that's just the way it's always going to be. Always think that you're not going to be able to do it, or the phrase won't come, or the image won't come, or I have nothing to say, or it's always that way.
One of the writers I talked with said, since you don't know where the talent came from, when it goes away, you don't know where to go to get it back.
Yeah, that's right. These are all writers' fears. They can be articulated lots of ways. That's one way of saying it, It's just, but I just, it's very common, It's very common. And, as part of the job is to ignore it. It's just one of the lousy parts of the job, is that you're going to have fear, and you're going to have apprehension, and you're going to ignore it, and you're going to go and start anyway. You're going to go and sit in a room, and you know that there's nothing in the room, and you have nothing in your head, and you're going to go and sit there until something starts to come. I think the idea if you can accept the idea of relaxing and letting it come, it'll be easier on you than if you sit in there and really strain.
You still don't have that.
Well, I'm not up to that. I have, I mean, in these particular
Oh, you haven't
projects.
got to the. You haven't got to the room yet.
Yeah, I'm not up to the room. I'll go into the room in the beginning of July. I have there happens to be a lot of research in these particular things, so I'm doing the research, which gives me the illusion of working when I'm not actually.
When I did my research, I came up with a quote. This is an interview John Landau did with you 16 years ago about Clive Davis predicting doom and gloom that Simon and Garfunkel's
I often think about that.
You, no matter
even
how,
still,
never be as successful. And you said, yeah, like Dean Martin, Jerry Lewis. Don't tell me that. Don't tell me that statement. I'll never be bigger than. How do you know what I'll do? I know you know what I'm going to do in the next decade of my life. It could be maybe my greatest time of work. Maybe I'm finished. Maybe I'm not going to do it till I'm 50. People will then say, fine. But isn't that
amazing,
interesting,
isn't
that
it?
quote? Isn't that? I dug this out. I was reading the interview, and wow. As you reflect on that now, there had to be great insecurity at that point with Clive telling you and other people like this.
well, it didn't help that he said that. Yeah, I mean, essentially he was saying, that's what he said. You'll never be bigger than. Simon and Garfunkel is a household name. You will never be bigger than this. Don't do this. This is a big mistake. And I was thinking, well, you know, maybe that's just going to be the early part of my career. And people say, yeah, he was sang in, you know, with Simon and Garfunkel in the early part of his career. I mean, yeah, I'm sure I was uncomfortable. I remember being uncomfortable with that. But I already had the idea that you could, you know, that you could grow. Yeah, and I think, you know, if you keep, I mean, in my case, that seems to have worked out. You know, I mean, I'm still interested in the same subject that I was interested in at the age of 12, which is fantastic for my life. You know, I mean, to be this interested in a subject is great. It's a big relief to me because if I wasn't interested, I mean, then what would I do? If I didn't have any, you know.
That's a terrific way to wrap this up. I love that. Thank you.